Take your things. I'm done carrying a broke man.
You really believe money decides who I am? Sir, the board needs you for the billion wealth. You stopped seeing your husband.
Those SUVs, they came here for you?
They came for the company I built.
7 years, Daniel. Why didn't you tell me?
I did. You just never cared to listen.
I love status more than I listen to you.
An apology starts change. It doesn't prove change.
Then watch what I do, not what I promise.
Then maybe we still have something worth rebuilding.
She stood on the porch of the house he paid for, pointing toward the street, telling him to leave as if she were returning something defective. He had not raised his voice. He had not begged. He had simply stood in the driveway with a suitcase at his feet and the quiet certainty of a man who knew something she didn't. And that stillness, that refusal to collapse, made her angrier than anything he could have said. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It started as most things do with an ordinary Tuesday that chose not to stay ordinary. Daniel Cole came home at 11:30 in the morning because his 10 o'clock meeting had ended early. He turned onto Hadley Court in his 2015 pickup truck, the same one he'd driven for the past 6 years, the one with the small dent above the rear left wheel, and what he saw made him slow to a stop before he even reached the driveway. His belongings were outside, not dumped, not scattered in rage the way a storm scatters things. They were arranged almost carefully in a row along the concrete. 2 suitcases zipped shut, a cardboard box sealed with packing tape, a garment bag laid flat across the top. Laura had been thorough about it. She'd even placed his work boots side by side near the mailbox toes, pointing toward the street, as if to show him the direction he should go. He sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at the boots. He looked at the box with his name on it in black marker, just Daniel, nothing else. He looked at the house. The curtains in the front window shifted. She was watching. He got out of the truck slowly. He walked up the driveway and set his keys on top of the nearest suitcase, then straightened up and waited. She came out through the front door. Laura Cole, at 40, was a woman who understood the mechanics of presentation. She wore the clothes she wore when she wanted to feel in control: dark slacks, a white blouse, hair pulled back. She stopped at the edge of the porch and crossed her arms. The expression on her face was the one she used when she believed she had already won. Carol Jenkins, their neighbor 3 houses down, had been pruning her rose bushes along the side yard fence. She stopped when she saw Daniel standing there. She did not go back inside. Across the street, a man who Daniel recognized as the husband of the couple who'd moved in last spring stood frozen on his front steps, holding a coffee mug he'd forgotten to drink from. Laura spoke loudly enough that the quiet street could hear. "I packed everything you'll need. I suggest you make arrangements today." Daniel looked at her. "What happened? What happened?" She repeated the phrase as if the question itself was the final evidence of his failure. 3 years, Daniel. 3 years of watching you pretend that this is enough. She gestured at the house, at the truck, at him. The same truck, the same clothes, the same excuses about why we don't go anywhere, why we don't do anything, why I have to explain to my friends why my husband. She stopped. Reset. You have nothing to offer. You have nothing to show. And I am done pretending otherwise. Laura, do not. Her voice sharpened. I have been patient. I have waited. I convinced myself you were building something, that there was something you were working toward. But there is nothing. There has never been anything. And I cannot keep performing this marriage for people who already see what I refused to. Daniel was quiet. He crouched down and picked up a photograph that had slipped from somewhere. He didn't know how it had gotten outside, but it was face down near the base of a suitcase. He turned it over. Their 3rd anniversary. They were at a park in the mountains, Laura laughing at something he'd said, genuine and unguarded, her hand on his arm. He looked at it for a moment, and then placed it in his shirt pocket. Laura noticed. Something in her expression tightened. Stillness from the person you are trying to wound is its own form of damage. Say something, she said. I'm listening, he said. Don't do that. Her voice rose slightly. Don't stand there like you're above this. You are not above this. You are broke, Daniel. You have always been broke. And I spent 3 years telling myself it didn't matter, and I was lying. She stepped down from the porch. Closer now. You embarrass me. Every time Vanessa and Brett invite us somewhere, every time I have to explain why we're driving, that she pointed at the truck, I spent 20 minutes inventing excuses for you. I am done inventing. Daniel held her gaze. He did not look away. He did not argue. She said the thing then, the sentence that would follow her for months. I spent 3 years trying to make you into something. You are nothing. Carol Jenkins heard it. The man with the coffee mug heard it. The curtains in 2 other windows shifted. The word landed in the driveway and stayed there. Daniel breathed in slowly. He did not respond to the word. He looked down the street instead, past Laura, past Carol, past the corner where Hadley Court bent toward the main road. A low sound was building from that direction. Not loud, organized. The sound of multiple engines keeping the same pace. Laura turned to look. She frowned, confused, then irritated because whatever was happening at the end of the street was pulling the attention she had arranged for herself. 5 black SUVs turned onto Hadley Court, in a single formation, moving at an even speed, maintaining equal distance between each vehicle. Their hoods reflected the late morning sun. They moved like something institutional, not rushed, not casual, with the kind of precision that signals that the people inside have done this before. They lined the curb in front of the house, one by one, engines idling, doors remaining closed. The man with the coffee mug set it down on his front steps without looking at it. Carol Jenkins stood perfectly still at her fence. Laura stared at the convoy. What is this? Daniel said nothing. He turned to face the vehicles, his hands at his sides, his expression unchanged. The door of the lead SUV opened. A man in a fitted black suit stepped out, Derek Ashton, Daniel's VP of Operations, who had worked for him for 9 years and who carried himself with the specific calm of someone who considered composure a professional obligation. He walked up the driveway, past the suitcases, past the boots, past Laura. He stopped directly in front of Daniel and dipped his head once. Sir, the board has assembled. We need to leave. The word sir landed in the air of Hadley Court and did not move. Laura blinked. Her mouth opened slightly. The remaining SUV doors opened. Men and women in tailored clothing stepped out without hurry. One of them, a young woman with a tablet under her arm, began collecting Daniel's belongings from the driveway, handling each item with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom this was simply part of her work. Another lifted the garment bag. A third picked up the boots. They moved as a unit. No instructions given, no confusion, just trained, purposeful action in the middle of an ordinary suburban street. Laura stepped backward. She looked at Daniel, then at Derek, then at the convoy. She was trying to calculate something, and the numbers weren't working. Her voice, when it came, was half its earlier volume. What is going on? Daniel looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a clarity that was heavier than either of those things. He said, "You should go inside, Laura." He turned and walked toward the lead SUV. The rear door was already open. Inside, leather ambient light privacy glass. The architecture of a world she had never asked him about. The last thing she saw before the door closed was Daniel's profile. The same man who had stood in his driveway a few minutes ago, absorbing her words, without flinching, settling into the back seat, as if this too was simply the next thing in his day. The convoy began to move. Laura stood barefoot at the edge of the driveway, one hand raised slightly, as if she'd meant to say something more. The SUVs passed Carol Jenkins, past the man with the coffee mug, turned at the corner, and disappeared from Hadley Court. The street was very quiet. In her hand, Laura's phone buzzed once, a Charlotte news alert. She looked at it without understanding yet, then looked back at the empty corner where the convoy had gone, and for the first time in 3 years of constructed certainty, she had no idea what to say. The air inside the SUV was different from the air on Hadley Court. Outside had been noise and brick and the kind of heat that gets trapped in suburban concrete. Inside was controlled temperature lighting sound, all of it tuned to a specific register of quiet. The leather adjusted slightly as the door sealed and the street disappeared behind privacy glass. Daniel did not look back. He reached into his shirt pocket and set the photograph on the armrest beside him. Laura laughing at the mountain park. He didn't study it. He just let it be there. Derek sat in the front passenger seat, already on the phone with 2 words, en route, then off. He turned slightly. The European team is live. Naomi's holding the press room until we arrive. Vote is scheduled at 1:15. Okay. The Charlotte media have already picked up the announcement. Market reaction is positive so far. Derek paused, then said the other thing more carefully. There was some activity on social in the last hour. Someone on Hadley Court posted a video. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Of the convoy. Yes, sir. Leave it. Understood. The convoy merged smoothly onto the main road and accelerated without drama. Outside the window, Charlotte moved past gas stations, a strip mall, a park where 2 older men sat on a bench with coffee cups. The ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea it was driving parallel to a fairly consequential decision. Daniel watched it without looking particularly at any of it. He opened the acquisition file on the tablet Derek handed him. Coal Energy Solutions. Founded 11 years ago in a rented office space above a dry cleaner in Greensboro. 3 employees to start: Daniel, a civil engineer named Frank, who retired 2 years ago, and a woman named Priya, who now ran the Southeast Division. They'd won their first infrastructure contract from a rural Alabama county that had gone 18 months with unreliable grid access. The county administrator had called Daniel directly after seeing the proposal. He'd said, "If half of this is real, we'll sign." It was all real. That was the story the board knew. It was also the story Laura never asked about. 7 years of marriage. He had tried to tell her early on. She would nod and change the subject. After a while, he stopped mentioning it. Not because he was ashamed, because he understood that her interest wasn't there, and he told himself it didn't matter. He told himself that marriage was about the person, not the work. He was right about that. He was wrong about whether it could survive without the person being curious about who he actually was. The convoy turned into the private garage entrance beneath the Meridian Tower. Security gates recognized the first SUV and opened before it stopped. Inside, the concrete was clean, the lighting was exact, and there was no sound from the city above. This was where the institutional weight of coal energy lived, not flashy, not decorated for anyone's approval, just designed to function. The elevator opened before they reached it. The ride to the 50th floor took 40 seconds. Daniel buttoned his jacket while Derek briefed him on the 3 board members most likely to raise procedural questions about the acquisition timing. It was a $1.4 billion deal, a purchase of Harwick Infrastructure Partners, a European consortium with operations in Germany, the Netherlands, and Portugal. The deal would expand Coal Energy's footprint into 4 international markets and effectively triple the company's grid coverage. It was a significant decision. It was not, however, the most significant thing that had happened to Daniel Cole today. The boardroom doors were open when the elevator arrived. 18 people rose from their seats. Not ceremonially, the gesture was simply automatic, the habituated respect that forms in rooms where someone has consistently earned it. Naomi Walsh, the communications director, was at the far end of the table with her laptop open and her press briefing notes printed and waiting. She nodded once at Daniel as he walked to the head of the table. "Good afternoon." His voice was even. "Where do we stand?" A board member from the Chicago office summarized the final due diligence numbers. Another raised a question about integration timelines in Portugal. The regulatory approval window was narrower than projected. Daniel listened to each concern in sequence, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then let the discussion settle. He did not rush it. When the room had said everything it needed to say, he looked at the acquisition summary one final time. The numbers were right. The risk was calculated. The rural Alabama county, from the beginning, that lesson about what energy access could mean to people who didn't have reliable options, was present somewhere underneath all of it. Approved. The room did not erupt. It exhaled. The collected breath of 18 professionals who had spent 6 weeks preparing for this moment. Naomi made a note, said something quietly to the person beside her, and began moving toward the press briefing preparation. Board members rose, moved toward Daniel with handshakes, brief exchanges. "Good call. The Portugal piece will require attention. Strong position for Q4. He responded to each without performance because there was none required. When the room thinned, Naomi approached with her tablet. The live feed from the press room was visible on the screen, a podium with the Coal Energy Solutions logo behind it, a room already filling with financial journalists. "Ready when you are," she said. 5 minutes. She stepped away. Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city. The same city he looked at every working day. The same city where 2 hours ago a woman who had stopped seeing him told everyone within earshot that he was nothing. His phone showed 19 missed calls from Laura, 4 from her sister Nina, 2 from a number he didn't recognize. He did not open any of them. He thought about the photograph in his pocket, about the woman in it, the earlier version of Laura, the one who used to fall asleep reading on the couch and didn't care that they didn't have the kind of vacations her friends posted about. He was not sure when that woman had started measuring herself against other people's displays. He was not sure he'd noticed in time to say anything useful. He put the phone away. Naomi returned. "Chairman, they're ready." He walked to the press room with the same unhurried deliberateness he had walked to the SUV on Hadley Court. The cameras turned toward him. The room settled. He adjusted the microphone, looked at the assembled journalists, and began to speak about infrastructure, about energy access, about what this acquisition would mean for underserved grids in 3 countries. He said it clearly and specifically, because clarity was the only kind of power he had ever trusted. In a house on Hadley Court, a news alert was beginning its slow bloom across a phone screen. In a neighborhood that had watched a convoy of 5 black SUVs materialize and disappear in the space of a morning, a story was beginning to rewrite itself. Daniel Cole finished his remarks, answered 4 questions, and stepped away from the podium while the financial press was still typing. He had a meeting in 20 minutes. The world moved forward. So did he. The driveway was empty when Laura turned back toward it. The convoy had taken Daniel's things. All of it, the suitcases, the garment bag, the cardboard box, even the boots that she had placed near the mailbox as punctuation. What remained was just concrete, the same oil stain near the garage door that had been there since winter, and the ordinary silence of a Tuesday morning that had stopped being ordinary about 40 minutes ago. Laura stood barefoot at the edge of the driveway for a long moment. Then she went inside. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been before the scene. Houses know when something has shifted. The rooms felt the same furniture, same light through the kitchen window. Same coffee mug she'd left on the counter, but the air had a different quality to it. The particular stillness of a space that has just had its center removed. She sat at the kitchen table. Her hands were in her lap. Her phone was face up in front of her, showing a series of texts from Vanessa that had come in during the driveway scene and that she had not read yet. A knock at the front door. She almost didn't answer it. Then she stood, went to the door, and opened it to find Carol Jenkins standing on the porch with her gardening gloves still on, holding them in one hand. Carol was 63 years old and had lived on Hadley Court for 22 years. She had been at this house for block parties for a Thanksgiving one year when Laura's family couldn't make it for the unremarkable ordinary of shared neighborhood life. She was not an intrusive woman. She was, however, honest in the way that people are when they have lived long enough to stop worrying about whether honesty is convenient. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," Laura said. "I'm fine." Carol looked at her for a moment, with the specific patience of someone who has heard that answer before and knows what it usually means. She did not press. She said, "All right. I'm just across the way if you need anything." She started to leave, then turned back once. "Laura, those weren't rental vehicles." She said it simply, without agenda. Then she went back down the steps and across the street. Laura closed the door. She stood in the hallway. Those weren't rental vehicles. She hadn't thought they were rental vehicles. She didn't know what she had thought, except that there had to be a reasonable explanation. A client meeting some kind of professional situation. She wasn't aware of something that would make the scene look less significant than it felt. Daniel kept his work life private. He always had. She had stopped finding that interesting and started finding it irritating somewhere around 18 months ago. The thought surfaced now slowly. She didn't actually know what he did. She knew the company name, Coal Energy Solutions. She'd seen it on the occasional piece of mail, and she knew it had something to do with electrical infrastructure, and she knew it was based in Charlotte. And that was roughly the extent of what she could say with confidence. She used to know more. She was sure she used to know more. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped asking and started comparing. And the comparing had filled up the space where curiosity used to be. Her phone buzzed. "Vanessa." She answered. "Did you do it?" Vanessa's voice had the particular brightness of someone who had been waiting for a friend's bold move and was ready to celebrate it. "Yes." "Good. It was the right call." "You've been unhappy for there were 5 SUVs, Laura said. Silence. 5 black SUVs. They pulled up right in the middle of it. There were men in suits. One of them called Daniel Sir and said the board was assembled. She heard how it sounded as she said it. They collected his things from the driveway like it was nothing, and then they left." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "What board, what company, I don't know." "You don't know." Not a question. An echo. "I mean, I know he works in energy infrastructure. I know the company name, I don't—" She stopped. The sentence didn't have a good place to go. Laura, Vanessa said slowly, "Are you sure about what you know?" Laura's hand tightened around the phone slightly. "I'm not having second thoughts, Vanessa. I know what the marriage looked like. I know what he wasn't giving me, right? Okay. I'm sure it's just a client thing. Some kind of big meeting. You know how those corporate guys can be, everything's a performance." Laura almost agreed. She almost let the familiar script run its course. Vanessa validating Laura, confirming both of them landing on the same conclusion they'd been landing on for months. But something had snagged in her. The way Derek Ashton had walked up that driveway, past the boxes, past the boots, past her, like she was scenery. Like the scene playing out around her was entirely beside the point. "I'll talk to you later," Laura said. "Okay. But Laura, you did the right thing. You deserve better than what." She ended the call. She sat back at the kitchen table. She picked up her phone and navigated to the news app she used. Not the local one, the financial one that sent notifications she usually dismissed. She typed Coal Energy Solutions into the search bar. The results loaded. She read the first headline, then the second, then the one below that. The room was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. A car passed on the street. Ordinary sounds. The kind of sounds that persist regardless of what is happening inside a house. Laura set the phone down on this table. Her coffee had gone cold while she was outside on the driveway. She did not reach for it. She sat there for a long time. The press conference was at 4 in the afternoon, but Laura had found the earlier announcement by 2. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone held in both hands, replaying the live stream clip that the Charlotte Business Journal had posted online. Daniel at a podium in a suit she had never seen him wear. The Coal Energy Solutions logo behind him, clean, institutional, designed for permanence. The way he stood at that podium was not the posture of a man attending someone else's event. It was the posture of the room's center of gravity. She watched his face as he spoke. He used the same voice he used with her, measured, unhurried, precise. She had called that voice boring at some point in the last 18 months. She had told Vanessa he was impossible to read, that he never got excited about anything, that she felt like she was living with a wall instead of a person. Now, watching the financial journalists lean forward in their seats when he spoke, she was beginning to understand that she had misread the wall entirely. The acquisition was described as a $1.4 billion deal. The headline on the financial network called it a strategic masterstroke. A market analyst quoted in the article used the phrase rare discipline in a sector that typically rewards spectacle over substance. Daniel was described in the profile that had been live since the morning as the founder who built a $2.8 billion infrastructure company by refusing to be interesting until the results were undeniable. She read that sentence 3 times. Her sister Nina called at 2:47 p.m. Laura. Her voice was carefully neutral in the way that Nina's voice got when she was processing something and hadn't decided yet how to feel about it. "I know," Laura said. "Is that Daniel on the news?" "Yes." Nina was quiet for a moment. "The chairman of Coal Energy?" "Yes." "The acquisition they just announced?" "Yes, Nina." Another pause. Then Laura, "How did you not know?" It was the question she had been asking herself since 2 o'clock, and she didn't have an answer that didn't implicate her. She said, "I stopped asking." Nina let the silence sit there, which was its own kind of response. "Then are you okay?" "I'm trying to figure that out." After the call with Nina, Laura sat for a while without looking at anything in particular. Then her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, "Call me." Then a second one, "I just saw something about Brett." She almost ignored it. She opened it instead. The story was below the fold, on the same financial news site she'd been reading. Hartley Development Group, Brett Hartley's company. The one with the new uptown office and the branded SUVs and the client dinners at restaurants that made the other wives feel observed instead of comfortable, had filed for emergency debt restructuring. Total undisclosed liabilities, $4.1 million. The company had been operating on credit facilities that matured in the second quarter and could not be refinanced. Laura read it once, then read it again. Brett Hartley, who drove a $60,000 car, who wore the watch, who always seemed to be in transit between places that mattered and sent photos as evidence. The man she had held up in her mind as proof of what a husband was supposed to look like. He had been performing the whole time. Not just performing, he had been performing on borrowed money in front of an audience that wanted to believe it, and Laura had wanted to believe it most of all, because believing it gave her something to aim her dissatisfaction at. If Brett could do it, Daniel should do it. If Brett's life looked like that, hers was supposed to look like that too. That was the logic she had been living inside of for a year and a half. She put the phone down. A knock came at the door, lighter than Carol's had been more tentative. When Laura opened it, Carol was there again, this time without the gardening gloves. She had a small plate covered with a cloth in her hands. "I baked this morning," she said. "I thought you might not have eaten." Laura looked at the plate. She thought she might cry. She didn't. She said, "Thank you, Carol." "I'm not going to say anything else about today," Carol said quietly. "I just didn't want you to be alone with an empty kitchen." She handed over the plate, nodded once, and went back down the steps. Laura closed the door, set the plate on the counter, pulled back the cloth. A small loaf of lemon bread still slightly warm. She stood in the kitchen and looked at it. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting the particular gold of a late summer Tuesday, when nothing is supposed to be different, but everything is. She thought about Daniel stepping into the SUV that morning. Not in triumph. Not checking to see if she was watching. Just moving to the next thing the way he always had. That evening, after the press conference had concluded, and the Charlotte news cycle had turned Daniel's name into a half-hour story, and the neighborhood had spent the better part of the afternoon on their phones doing the math. Laura's phone buzzed one more time. Daniel's number. One voicemail. She sat down on the couch and pressed play. His voice was calm, not cold, just professional. "Laura, the attorneys will reach out to you this week. Take care of yourself." A pause. "I hope you do." The recording ended. She played it again, then once more. "Take care of yourself." She had not heard that particular sentence in Daniel's voice in a very long time, and it landed differently than any of the things she had said in the driveway, because it contained no anger, no punishment, no scorekeeping. It was simply what it was, a man who had been told he was nothing speaking to her with the residual care of someone who had not yet let go of who she used to be. She sat in the living room in the dark, as the street outside went quiet, holding the phone, not moving, listening to the voicemail for the fourth time. Nina arrived the next morning with a bag of groceries and the careful expression of someone who has rehearsed how not to say what they actually think. She set the groceries on the counter without comment, filled the coffee maker, and sat down across from Laura at the kitchen table. She looked at her sister the way she had looked at her when they were teenagers, and one of them had made a decision the other knew was coming, not surprised exactly, but still in the presence of the consequence. "Tell me what happened," Nina said. Laura told her. All of it, the months of comparison, Vanessa and Brett, the feeling that Daniel was withholding something, the specific calculus she had used to convince herself that his restraint was inadequacy. She told it plainly, the way you tell things to people who will not help you sanitize them. When she finished, Nina was quiet. "You didn't know what his company was," she said finally. "Not really. Not in detail." "Did he ever try to tell you?" Laura set her coffee down. "In the beginning, yes. When we first got married. He used to talk about it at dinner, and She stopped, examined the memory. "I would listen for a while and then bring up something else. And eventually, he stopped bringing it up. Because you stopped being interested. Because I stopped being interested." Nina did not pile onto that. She let it be the exact weight it was. "So your case against him," Nina said. was that he drove an old truck dressed, simply didn't brag, and didn't take you to the kinds of places that Brett Hartley took Vanessa. When you put it like that, how should I put it, Laura? There was no cruelty in the question. Just the precision of a sister who loved her enough not to let it go soft. You built an argument out of what he didn't perform, and now you know that underneath what he wasn't performing, there was an actual company, an actual life, an actual person that you stopped asking about. The coffee maker beeped. Neither of them moved to fill their cups. I know, Laura said. Their father called at 11 a.m. He had seen the news through a retired colleague who followed financial markets and had texted him a link at 7 in the morning. His voice on the phone was not loud. It was never loud when he was the most serious. He said, Laura, the man you sent away. He said it and then waited. She told him what she could. He listened. At the end, he said, Your mother and I always liked Daniel, which was true. Which was also in the context of this phone call, the softest possible version of something harder. After she got off with her father, she wandered through the house, not searching for anything, just moving through the rooms the way you move through something that is no longer exactly what it was. Daniel's home office was the third door on the left down the hallway. She had been in it maybe 6 times in 7 years. He used to joke gently that she found his work boring, and she had laughed and agreed. Now she opened the door and stood in the frame. The room was organized. Not obsessively papers in reasonable piles, books on shelves with tabs sticking out of them, a whiteboard with diagrams she couldn't fully interpret. On the shelf to the right of the desk, beside a row of technical manuals, sat a series of small framed items she had never bothered to look at closely. She walked in. An award from the National Renewable Energy Institute, Daniel Cole, founder of the year 7 years ago. A framed letter from the governor of North Carolina. A photograph of Daniel at a ribbon cutting in rural Alabama, standing beside people she didn't know, everyone smiling in the particular way of people for whom something is actually changing. A printed article from an industry magazine with the headline, The Quiet Infrastructure Revolution, How Coal Energy Built a National Grid Without Anyone Noticing. Without anyone noticing. She picked up the article. It was dated 4 years ago. She read the first paragraph. Daniel Cole has done something unusual in an industry that rewards announcement. He has built one of the most impactful clean energy infrastructure companies in the southeastern United States without making himself the story. That restraint, his team says, is not strategy. It is character. She set the article back down. She looked at the photograph from Alabama. She did not know those people's names. She did not know why Daniel had been there or what the ribbon cutting was for. And the terrible thing was that he would have told her if she had asked. She was certain of that. He would have told her everything, and she would have had coffee while he talked, and she would have let it become background noise, and she would have pivoted to whether they were going to Vanessa's dinner next Friday. Her phone buzzed. Vanessa. She stared at the name on the screen, thought about what Vanessa had been in her life for the past 18 months, a mirror held at a specific angle, one that showed her only the things she chose to see. She let the call go to voicemail. Vanessa called again. She sent a text, Laura, please. None of this is your fault. Brett was hiding things from me too. The debt is Laura didn't read the rest. She set the phone face down on Daniel's desk. The afternoon was very quiet. She stood in the office for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of a man's life that she had never made room to understand. Then an email appeared on her phone. From a law firm she didn't recognize. The subject line, Cole Legal Separation Petition Notice to Respondent. She opened it slowly. 2 words stayed with her: legal separation. Not dissolution, not divorce. Her attorney, whom she had already texted that morning about next steps, had said those were different things. Separation left the marriage intact. It was a pause, not a period. He had not filed a period. She did not know what that meant. She was not sure she deserved to hope. But she put the phone in her pocket and walked back out into the hallway. And the house still held the smell of the coffee Nina had made. And outside on Hadley Court, someone's sprinklers had turned on, and the ordinary afternoon continued around the edges of the wreckage she was standing in the middle of. The company kept an extended stay accommodation on the 14th floor of a building near the Meridian Tower, clean, minimal, the kind of space designed for utility rather than impression. A bed, a desk, a kitchen that had never been used for anything more ambitious than coffee. Daniel had stayed there 3 times in the past 5 years, when travel schedules made it impractical to drive back to Hadley Court. He unpacked the single bag the convoy team had retrieved from the driveway, hung the shirts, set the boots beside the door, placed the photograph of the mountain park on the nightstand. Then he called his mother. Maggie Cole answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call. She was 68, a retired critical care nurse from Greensboro, who had spent her career keeping things in order under pressure and applied that same quality to her personal life. She lived in a comfortable, assisted living community that she had chosen herself, evaluated with the clinical thoroughness of someone who had spent 30 years assessing care environments. "I saw the press conference," she said. "The acquisition went through." "That's not what I mean." Her voice was even. "I mean, I saw the news coverage, the reporters talking about the convoy, the video someone posted from your street." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. "Ah, your neighbors are very fast with their phones." "Yes." A pause. "Are you eating?" He almost smiled. That was always the first question. Not because she thought food fixed things, but because she had learned that when people stopped maintaining the basics, the real damage had started. "I'm fine, Mom. That's not the same question." "I ate." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then tell me about Laura," he told her. Not all of it. Not the things Laura had said in front of the neighbors, the specific sentences that had landed with the force they'd been intended to have, but the shape of it. The 18 months of drift. The comparison that had replaced conversation. The driveway. "She said she thought you were struggling," Maggie said. "She assumed. Did she ever ask no?" He looked at the photograph on the nightstand. "Not in a long time. And you never volunteered." "No." Maggie was quiet. This was one of the things he valued most about her. She knew when silence was a response, and when it was just waiting for him to catch up with himself. He waited. "You know," she said finally, "there's a difference between being private and being unavailable. I was available. She just stopped coming." "Daniel." Her tone was gentle but exact. "When someone stops coming, sometimes the door gets a little hard to find." He didn't answer. "You filed separation papers," she said. "Yes." "Not divorce." "No." She took a breath. "Are you going to tell me what that means?" "Not yet." He paused. "Because I don't know yet." "Honest," she said. "All right. I'm not going to push you." Another pause, and then, "She's not a bad person, Daniel. I know her. She got lost. I know she did." "Do you know the difference between lost and gone?" He looked at the photograph. Laura laughing. The mountain park. Before everything had started to calcify into comparison. Before the distance. "I'm trying to figure that out." Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to reach out to her." Mom, I'm not going to interfere. I'm not going to say anything about you or about the marriage. I just think she should know someone still sees her. She said it with the specific firmness of a woman who had spent her career advocating for people who needed someone in their corner. Is that all right? He thought about it. He thought about saying no. He didn't say it. All right. Good. A pause. Now, what did you actually eat today? He told her about the sandwich Derek had ordered from the deli on the ground floor of the Meridian Tower. She asked if it had vegetables in it. He said probably not the ones she would count. She told him that was exactly what she thought, and that he should order a proper dinner. He told her he would. They talked for a few more minutes. She mentioned a book she was reading, a program on television she'd found interesting. The physical therapy appointment she had next Thursday. Ordinary conversation. The kind that holds a relationship together, not because it contains anything remarkable, but because its continuity is its own form of care. After the call ended, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet room. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and opened the text thread with Laura. The most recent message from him was from 2 days ago, practical, about a plumbing appointment. Her most recent message was from the night before that. Something brief about dinner. He closed the thread. He did not send anything. He thought about what his mother had said. The difference between lost and gone. He had always believed those were the same thing, that when someone stopped finding their way back eventually, the distance became the fact. But maybe that was his own version of an assumption. Maybe he owed it to himself and to the woman in that photograph to find out which one was actually true. Tomorrow was the first full day of acquisition integration. International calls starting at 6 a.m. He needed to sleep. He turned off the light on the nightstand. The photograph remained on the table beside it, barely visible in the dark. He closed his eyes. He thought about the mountain park. The sound Laura used to make when she laughed at the unexpected kind of thing, unguarded, genuinely surprised, the laugh that couldn't be performed. He hadn't heard that laugh in longer than he wanted to calculate. He thought about the door. 1 inch. That was what the separation filing meant if he was being honest with himself. He hadn't closed it. He didn't know if he was ready to say why. He was asleep within 10 minutes. The city outside continued without him. She found the building from the address listed in the press coverage. Laura did not call ahead. She stood in the lobby of the Meridian Tower at 4:45 in the afternoon, 4 days after the driveway scene, wearing a gray cardigan she had bought last spring, when she was still deciding what kind of person she wanted to be. She told the front desk she was looking for Daniel Cole. The front desk called upstairs. There was a pause that lasted long enough for her to reconsider twice. Then, "You can go up." The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it was. She had prepared things to say. She had rehearsed them, discarded them, replaced them, discarded the replacements. Now standing in a hallway that smelled like carpet cleaner and institutional calm, she recognized that no version of a prepared speech was going to be adequate, and that the only honest thing she could do was walk through the door and say what was true. Daniel opened it before she could knock. He looked the same as he always looked, which was somehow the most disorienting thing. She had expected him to look different now that she knew what he was. She had expected the world around him to look different, to have adjusted. But he was in jeans and a plain shirt, with his sleeves folded back, and the room behind him was modest and spare, and he did not look like someone who had just closed a billion-dollar deal. He looked like Daniel. "Come in," he said. She did. The room had the anonymity of a professionally managed space, nothing personal, except one thing: the photograph on the nightstand from the mountain park, which she recognized before she looked away from it. She sat in the chair by the window. He sat at the desk, turned slightly toward her. Not far. Not close. I wasn't sure you'd let me up, she said. I wasn't sure I would either. She looked at him. He looked back at her. This was the thing about Daniel, he waited. He did not fill space with noise or manage awkwardness by talking through it. He just waited until there was something worth saying. I was wrong, she said. I want to start with that because I don't want the rest of what I'm saying to feel like I'm building toward it as a punchline. I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I had convinced myself I had reasons. He was quiet. The reasons were bad, she said. They were comparison. They were Vanessa's husband's car, and the vacations she posted, and the feeling that my life wasn't enough because it didn't look like something I could show people. I told myself you weren't providing. But what you weren't providing was proof. And that's not the same thing. She stopped. Then I stopped asking about your life because I decided it wasn't interesting. And that is the thing I am most ashamed of. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I know. Not dismissively, not as a concession. Just as a statement of fact he had known probably for longer than she had admitted it to herself. I believe that you mean what you're saying, he said. Right now in this room I believe it. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the desk. But apology is not proof of change. It's the beginning of the possibility of proof. She held the sentence. What would proof look like? I don't know, he said. That's something you'll have to figure out yourself. His voice was not unkind. It had the quality of something he had thought about carefully before he said it. If I tell you what to do to earn this back then, whatever you do is performance. It doesn't tell either of us anything real. She understood that. It was harder to understand than a list would have been. What about the separation papers, she asked. I filed separation, not dissolution. He let that sit for a moment. That was intentional. I'm not telling you what it means because I don't know yet. I'm not asking you to wait. I'm just telling you what I chose to file. She looked at the window. The city from the 14th floor. She had never been inside a building this close to downtown. She and Daniel had lived 20 minutes away from this skyline, and she had never asked him to bring her here. Did you always know who you were, she asked. It came out differently than she meant it. More genuine. No, he said. But I knew what mattered to me. That's different. She stood slowly. She had not expected reconciliation from this meeting. She had not even hoped for it. Not really. She had come because she needed him to hear her, and he had heard her, and now she needed to leave before she started asking for things she hadn't earned yet. She crossed the room toward the door. She passed the wall with the company photographs, project sites, team events, milestones. Her eyes moved across them and snagged on one she hadn't noticed immediately, a ribbon cutting in front of a large utility building. Daniel in the center. And at the edge of the group in a yellow cardigan, smiling at the same angle as Daniel, clearly proud Maggie. Laura stopped. She looked at the photograph. Maggie, who she had met probably 12 times in 7 years. Who sent birthday cards with specific handwritten notes. Who had asked Laura once with the quiet directness of a woman who meant every word if she was happy. Laura had said yes and changed the subject. She had never asked Maggie anything about herself. She knew Maggie had been a nurse. She didn't know what kind. She didn't know what the ribbon cutting was for, or what Maggie's role in Daniel's professional life had been, or what Maggie thought about the world she'd watched her son build from the outside. She had been standing at the edge of a person's life for 7 years, and had chosen the view over the conversation. She turned back to Daniel. He had watched her stop at the photograph without saying anything. I'm going to go, she said. He nodded. She walked out the door and into the hallway, and the elevator came and she rode it down to the ground floor in silence, and she stepped out into the Charlotte afternoon and drove home to a house that felt very large for one person. She thought about the photograph all the way back. Maggie in the yellow cardigan, Daniel at the podium. An ordinary Tuesday somewhere when something mattered. She thought about how many ordinary Tuesdays she had spent not paying attention. 3 months passed. The acquisition integration moved forward on schedule. Coal Energy Solutions was in European financial press regularly through September. Daniel's name appeared in profiles. He did not give interviews, for the company's communications team handled media carefully, with the same restraint that had characterized the company's growth from the beginning. There was a photograph from a site visit in Portugal that made the rounds on industry social media. Daniel in a hard hat, standing on a coastal infrastructure project, looking at something in the distance. He looked exactly like what he was, someone for whom the work was the point. On Hadley Court, autumn arrived the way it always did, slowly, and then all at once. The oaks along the sidewalk changed color from the top down. Someone on the block put Halloween decorations up early. Life moved forward with the particular indifference it has toward personal catastrophe. Laura did not contact Daniel. She had made this decision the morning after the visit to the Meridian Tower, and she had not broken it since. Not because the separation papers had said she shouldn't, but because Daniel had been right about proof. Reaching out would be reaching for something before she had done anything to deserve it. She understood that. She was trying to act accordingly. She began seeing a therapist in late August, a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, who had an office on Park Road, and a way of asking questions that made you understand midway through answering that you had already known the answer. Laura had gone initially expecting to be told she was a victim of comparison culture, or that Daniel had failed her in some way she hadn't identified. Instead, the first 6 weeks felt more like a systematic dismantling of the stories she had been telling herself. "Who told you visibility was the same as value?" Dr. Okafor asked in their third session. Laura thought about it. No one specific. Everyone. The whole situation. What situation? The people around us. Vanessa. The way things looked. You made choices based on the way things looked to other people. Yes. And how do things look to you when no one else is watching? That question had stayed with her for weeks. She let the friendship with Vanessa go. It did not happen with a confrontation or a dramatic conversation. It happened gradually, the way a tide goes out. She returned fewer texts, declined. The invitations stopped performing the role of the person who was always present in Vanessa's narrative. One morning in September, she realized it had been 3 weeks since she'd answered a message, and she felt no impulse to catch up. That absence told her something significant. She found a former colleague from her marketing years, a woman named Jules, who had moved to Charlotte from Austin 2 years ago, and who Laura had met for lunch once, and then never followed up with. She texted Jules. They met for coffee. Laura was honest about what had happened with the marriage, not in the version designed to generate sympathy, but in the plain version. Jules listened without performing judgment and said, "That sounds like a hard year to live through." It was the right thing to say. Not absolution, not condemnation, just accurate. She began reconnecting with the parts of herself she had let atrophy. She had a degree in communications. She had worked in marketing before the marriage. She was good at it, and she had set it aside not because she chose to, but because she had filled the space with social management instead of actual work. She started taking on small freelance consulting projects. A nonprofit needed a communications audit. A restaurant owner needed a launch strategy. Small things. Real things. She went for walks in the morning. Not for exercise. To be outside in the world without an audience. On a Friday afternoon in October, Carol Jenkins knocked on her door and asked if she wanted to come over for coffee. She went. They sat in Carol's kitchen, which was warm and slightly cluttered, in the way of kitchens that had been used for actual cooking for decades. Carol made the coffee strong, and they sat across from each other, and Carol said, "I watched you on that driveway back in August. I've thought about it often." Laura looked at her coffee. "What did you see?" "Someone very scared," Carol said, pretending to be very sure. Laura was quiet for a long time. Then, "You're right." Carol nodded. She didn't press further. She talked about her garden, about a documentary series she'd been watching about her daughter, who lived in Raleigh and called every Sunday. Normal things. The conversation about the driveway existed in between the normal things and was not bigger than them. When Laura walked home, the street was quiet and October cool, and the trees had gone orange at their edges. She felt for the first time in a long time like someone who was moving forward instead of standing still inside a version of herself that had stopped working. Then her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then something made her answer, "Laura." The voice was careful and specific, with the measured quality of someone who considered what they said before they said it. "This is Maggie Cole." Laura stopped walking. "I hope this isn't a bad time," Maggie said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Maggie Cole was direct in the way that people become direct when they have spent decades in a profession where clarity is the difference between good care and inadequate care. She told Laura that she had a cardiology appointment the following Thursday in Greensboro. Her usual aide, a kind woman named Patricia, who drove her to medical appointments twice a month, had a family situation and couldn't make it. Maggie had not wanted to call Daniel because he was in the middle of a string of calls with the Portuguese integration team that started at 6 in the morning and ran until evening. "I could call my friend Dorothy," Maggie said, "but she drives too fast and I don't like to worry." A pause. "Would you be willing?" Maggie asked. "It's 2 hours each way. The appointment is at noon." Laura stood on the sidewalk of Hadley Court in the October afternoon with her phone pressed to her ear. She was aware in a way that required no analysis that this was a test, not one Maggie had designed, not one Daniel had arranged, but one the universe had constructed with the specific precision of something that would reveal exactly what she was made of right now. She said, "Yes. Of course." Thursday morning, she woke up at 6, drove down to the small parking lot of the Greensboro Assisted Living Campus by 9:30, and found Maggie already waiting in the lobby in a teal cardigan with her handbag in her lap. She stood when Laura came through the door and said, "You look well," which was the most generous interpretation possible of what Laura looked like at 9:30 on a weekday in a car that had been on the highway for 2 hours. They drove to the medical complex near the hospital. Maggie was a composed passenger, not backseat driver composed, but genuinely calm, with the contained alertness of someone who had spent her career watching people manage anxiety and had developed her own system for not adding to the load in a room. They talked during the drive. Maggie asked about Laura's consulting work, which meant she'd heard about it from somewhere, probably Daniel, which meant Daniel had been keeping some account of her life, which was information Laura stored carefully and did not allow herself to build too much upon. The appointment was with Dr. Nguyen, a cardiologist, who had been managing Maggie's care for 3 years. The waiting room was the ordinary kind: industrial chairs, a children's corner, a television showing the news at low volume. When Maggie was called in, Laura sat alone in the waiting room and read 2 magazine articles she didn't retain. Then the appointment ran longer than scheduled, and a nurse came out to speak to her. "Are you with Margaret Cole?" "Yes." The doctor found an irregularity in her EKG. "We'd like to keep her for observation for a few hours, possibly overnight." "Is there someone I should contact?" Laura thought about Daniel in his morning calls. "Let me handle it." I'll stay. She called Nina's husband, who was a primary care physician, to ask what EKG irregularity pending observation actually meant in practical terms. He walked her through it calmly, likely not a crisis standard protocol important to monitor, but not necessarily alarming. She felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. She went to the reception desk and asked which room. She found Maggie attached to a monitor in a quiet observation bay, reading a magazine she'd taken from her handbag, with the composure of a woman who had seen far more complicated medical situations from the other side of the bed. "Sit down," Maggie said. "You look like you're going to hover." Laura sat. She did not hover. She found to her surprise that the room was not uncomfortable. Maggie had a quality of presence that converted anxious spaces into manageable ones, and Laura had been living in anxiety for 3 months and had learned something about sitting inside it without drowning. They talked. Not about Daniel, not about August. About Maggie's career, 31 years in critical care, 10 of them as a charge nurse, the last 5 before retirement, as a clinical educator training new staff. About a patient she had thought about for years, whose name she didn't share, but whose situation she described with the specificity of someone for whom that care had mattered. About the book she was currently reading, which she had opinions on. The afternoon passed. The monitor beeped at regular intervals. A nurse came in twice to check readings and told them the doctor would have an update by 6. Around 5:30, Maggie looked at Laura and said, "You didn't tell Daniel." "No. Were you going to?" "That's your call to make," Laura said. "Not mine." Maggie looked at her for a moment, with the evaluating attention of a woman who had spent decades assessing people under pressure. Then she reached over and placed her hand briefly on Laura's without saying anything. Dr. Nguyen arrived at 6:10. The irregularity was a minor conduction variation manageable with medication adjustment. No surgery indicated follow-up in 6 weeks. Maggie was cleared to go home. Laura helped her to the car. She carried the handbag. She adjusted the passenger seat. She drove back to the assisted living campus through the November dark, both windows down a few inches, because Maggie said she preferred the cold air on a clear night. The radio was on low, some kind of jazz station that neither of them chose, but neither changed. When they arrived, Laura walked her to the lobby door and waited while Maggie found her keycard. Maggie turned back and said, "Would you like to stay for dinner? They do a reasonable Thursday." "I should get back," Laura said. "But thank you." Maggie nodded. She reached out and touched Laura's arm once briefly. "Drive carefully." Laura drove back to Charlotte. 2 hours. The highway at night. The radio cycling through things she didn't particularly listen to. Halfway home, her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She didn't pick it up while driving. When she stopped for gas outside of Concord, she looked at the screen. A text from Daniel. "Mom told me what you did. Thank you." She sat in the gas station parking lot for a moment. The night was cold. The station lights buzzed. She read the message one more time. Then she put the phone face down in the cup holder and pulled back out onto the highway and drove the rest of the way home. She didn't write back that night. She wanted to. She chose not to. Some things are better offered without a claim on what they mean. The text from Daniel came 3 days after the hospital. She had not replied to thank you. She had not sent anything in those 3 days, not a response, not a follow-up, not an explanation. She had let it sit in the silence it deserved. His message said, "Would you be willing to meet somewhere simple?" She read it twice. She typed a response and deleted it, then typed yes. When, and sent it before she could deliberate further. They agreed on a Saturday morning at a diner called Morrison's on Morrison Boulevard, a place she had driven past 100 times, without going in the kind of diner that had been in the same location for 20 years. and had neither the ambition to be more than it was, nor any apparent reason to change. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that came in a ceramic mug with a small pitcher of cream whether you asked for it or not. Laura arrived 3 minutes early. Daniel was already there in the corner booth in jeans and a plain dark shirt, with his jacket over the back of the seat. He stood when she came in, which was the kind of thing she had once taken for granted about him, and had at some point stopped noticing. They sat across from each other. The waitress brought coffee without asking. They both took it. Daniel spoke first. "I've been thinking about what I want to say, and I've realized that almost everything I prepared sounds like a position instead of a conversation. So I'm going to start over." He looked at her across the table. "I have spent 3 months thinking about what I want, and I've realized the question isn't whether I can forgive you. I already have. The question is whether we can build something honest." She held that for a moment. "I don't want to build something that looks like what we had." "What do you want?" "Something real," she said. "Not the performance of a marriage. Actually knowing someone. Being known." He nodded. He asked, "What changed?" She told him about the therapy. About letting the Vanessa friendship go not in anger, just in the recognition that it had been a mirror pointed at the wrong angle. About Jules, who was honest and direct, and didn't need Laura to perform anything. About the consulting work. About the walks. About sitting in Carol Jenkins's kitchen talking about normal things and feeling for the first time in a long time, like a person who was actually present in her own life, rather than managing an image of it. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without filling the pauses with his own thoughts, waiting for her to reach the end of what she was actually trying to say. When she finished, he said, "Did you go to Greensboro because you wanted me to find out?" The question was direct. She answered it directly. "I went because Maggie needed someone. She called me. I went." She held his gaze. "I didn't call you because it wasn't mine to tell. I didn't do it to perform anything for you." She paused. "That's the truth." He looked at her. He nodded slowly. "That's the difference." The coffee was still warm. The diner hummed with the Saturday morning ambient quiet conversations at other tables. A cook calling something back from the kitchen, the low sound of a radio above the counter playing something neither of them registered specifically. He said, "Can I tell you something I never said?" "Yes. I kept my work separate from the house on purpose. Not to test you, not to hide anything, but because I wanted the house to be the one place where I was just Daniel." He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "I spent 7 years building something that other people measure in billions, and every day I walked through that door on Hadley Court, I wanted to just be a man who lived in a house. Not a chairman, not a market position. Just Daniel." She was quiet. "I wanted you to love that man," he said. She looked at him, at the jeans, the plain shirt, the same hands she had stopped holding at some point in the last 2 years. She said, "I did love that man. I stopped paying attention to him." "Why?" "Because I got scared," she said. She hadn't said it this plainly before, not even in therapy. "I got scared that if your world was as big as I sometimes sensed it was, then I wasn't interesting enough to be part of it. So I decided your world was small. Because a small world was easier to be adequate in." He was very still. "That's not your failure," she said. "It's mine. I made you smaller in my head because I didn't trust that I was enough for the real size of you." The diner was warm. Outside the window, Morrison Boulevard continued at its Saturday pace, a woman walking a dog, a man checking his phone at the crosswalk, a group of young people moving toward wherever their Saturday was taking them. Daniel said, "You're enough." She looked at him. "You were always enough," he said. That was never the problem. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at her coffee. She thought about the drawer in his home office, the photographs she hadn't asked about, the yellow cardigan in the ribbon-cutting photo. All the Tuesdays she had been somewhere else in her own mind, while he had been trying to just be present. "I want to do this differently," she said. "If you'll let me." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I think we should talk again. If you want to." "I want to." He paid the check when it came. He didn't make a production of it. He looked at the amount, put his card down, signed, and put his jacket on. They walked out into the Saturday morning together. The parking lot was half full. The air had the particular crispness of early November. Neither of them moved toward their cars immediately. She said, "Thank you for coming." He said, "Thank you for Greensboro." They stood there for a moment in the parking lot of a diner on Morrison Boulevard that would close at 2 p.m. on Saturdays and reopen at 6 on Sundays, and had absolutely no idea it had just hosted the most important conversation in either of their lives. Then they walked to their cars. She drove home. She sat in the driveway on Hadley Court for a full minute before going inside in the same spot where a convoy of 5 black SUVs had lined the curb 4 months ago. And she looked at the house that was still hers and thought about what it meant to choose to come back to something, not because you had to, but because you understood now what it had been all along. The separation paperwork was withdrawn in the second week of November. It was handled by attorneys procedurally, with the same efficient brevity with which it had been filed. No announcement, no ceremony. A legal status reverting to the one that had existed before an ordinary Tuesday decided to stop being ordinary. The attorneys confirmed it via email. Both of them received the same notification within minutes of each other on a Wednesday morning, and neither mentioned it when they spoke that evening. They had been talking most evenings, phone calls sometimes, an hour, sometimes 20 minutes. The kind of conversations that went through ordinary topics and landed occasionally on something important. He told her about the Portugal site visit. She told him about a presentation she'd given for the nonprofit client that had gone better than she expected. He asked follow-up questions. She asked about the coastal project she'd seen in the photograph. He told her the story of the first Alabama contract, the county administrator who'd said, "If half of this is real, we'll sign." She laughed, actually laughed, and said that sounded exactly like him. He visited the house for the first time in late November. A Sunday dinner which they kept low-key and deliberate. She cooked. He brought wine he had specifically not sent an assistant for. They ate at the kitchen table and talked through the meal, and afterwards sat in the living room for a while, not doing anything in particular, which was more comfortable than either of them had expected. He didn't stay. He went back to the Meridian Tower accommodation. Neither of them made a point of this. It was understood that returning was not a single act, but a series of decisions made at a pace that honesty required. He came back twice that week, then 3 times the week after. By the first week of December, he was staying 2 nights, and by the middle of December, the routine had formed without either of them announcing it. He moved back in on a Thursday afternoon, not dramatically. He arrived with 1 bag, not the entire inventory that the convoy team had collected from the driveway in August, that had been stored in the accommodation and brought over incrementally, just 1 bag for the night, and then he didn't leave. They both understood what it meant without saying it. His jacket went back on the hook by the door. His boots went back beside the door. The 2015 pickup went back in the driveway. Maggie came for the weekend after he moved back. Laura picked her up from the train station, and they drove back to Hadley Court together, talking about Maggie's book and her upcoming follow-up with Dr. Nguyen and a Christmas program at the assisted living campus that had been better than expected. Maggie was recovering well. The medication adjustment was working. When they arrived, Daniel was in the kitchen making the sauce that his mother had taught him when he was 22, which took 3 hours and required occasional argument about whether it needed more salt. Maggie added more salt. Daniel accepted the verdict. Laura set the table. She found the good placemats in the third drawer and remembered that she had bought them before the marriage drifted and had stopped using them somewhere in the middle because good placemats had felt like an ironic statement about domestic life. She used them now without irony. During dinner, Maggie said, "I haven't seen you both in a room together in a long time." She looked between them. This is better. It was better. Not fixed. There was still something in the air between them that required care, the kind of fragility that comes after something has been repaired and needs to be handled with some awareness of where the fracture lines are. But better was the right word. Better was a beginning. The weekend passed with the specific gentleness of people who were being careful with each other without making the carefulness the story. They drove Maggie to the botanical garden on Saturday afternoon, which she wanted to see before winter took the last of the displays. It was cold, and the garden was mostly bare, but there were late blooms in the greenhouse, and the light through the glass panels was good. On Sunday afternoon, Carol Jenkins knocked on the door again. She'd seen the lights on and Maggie's car in the driveway, and wanted to say hello to Maggie, whom she'd met at a street fair 3 years ago and gotten along with. She came in for 20 minutes and drank tea and talked about the neighborhood and the new family at the end of the block. She did not reference August. She seemed to have decided that was already the past, which was a particular form of grace. When Maggie left Sunday evening, she hugged Laura at the door and said quietly, "Thank you for Greensboro. That was the right thing." "You gave me the chance," Laura said. "No," Maggie said. "You gave yourself the chance. I just called." The week after Maggie's visit, Daniel came home from a long day of calls to find Laura at the kitchen table with her laptop and 3 pages of notes and a half-eaten sandwich. She asked him something about grid infrastructure that she'd read in a case study she'd been looking at for a client, something she genuinely didn't understand and wanted to. He sat down and explained it clearly, and without condescension, the way he had always talked, when he talked about things that mattered to him. She listened. She asked a follow-up question. He answered it. At some point during the conversation, she realized this was what dinner had been supposed to look like for years. 2 people interested in each other's lives. Not performing for an audience of imagined observers, but actually present for each other. She said so. He looked at her across the table. He said, "Yeah," and then "better late." She said "better late." Outside on Hadley Court, December had moved in quietly. The oak at the corner had lost its leaves. The new family down the street had put lights up. The neighborhood continued doing what neighborhoods do, holding ordinary life in the container of shared proximity through the changes that ordinary life brings, without particularly marking any of it. On Thursday evening, Daniel came to the table while she was on a call with a client, sat down across from her with a coffee and waited. She finished the call. He did not ask what it was about. He looked at her across the table. "Good call," he said. "Good call," she said. And it was. And then they made dinner. 6 months after the diner on Morrison Boulevard on a Saturday evening in the first week of May, Daniel and Laura sat on the front porch of the house on Hadley Court. Daniel had jeans on and the gray long-sleeve shirt she recognized from 7 years of evenings. Laura had a cardigan, the green one she'd bought last spring, not the gray one from before, and a book in her lap that she hadn't opened in an hour. The evening was the kind that southern springs occasionally produce, not warm enough to feel like summer, not cool enough to want to be inside. a calibration of light and temperature that made you want to be still and not waste it. He had iced tea. She had the cold remnants of a coffee she'd made before they came outside. The neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do on a Saturday evening. Someone was grilling 2 houses down, the smell of it drifting over in the way that is the most reliably civilized smell in the world. A car came down Hadley Court slowly, a couple inside arguing about something with the particular hand gestures of people who would be fine by morning. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The oaks at the edge of the driveway had fully greened out again. Laura said, "I think about that Tuesday sometimes." He said, "Me too." She looked at the driveway, the concrete where the boxes had sat, the place near the mailbox where he had placed his boots. "I'm grateful for it," she said. He turned to look at her. Why, she thought about how to say it, because I didn't know who I was until I had to face who I'd become. She paused. The driveway was the clearest I'd seen myself in years. He was quiet for a moment. "It was the clearest I'd seen you too. Not in a bad way. I mean, I saw who you were capable of being." He looked at the street. "I wasn't sure you'd find your way there." "I almost didn't." "I know." They sat with that for a moment, the way people sit with the near misses of their lives, when they are far enough away to look at them without the altitude sickness. The acquisition integration had concluded in January. Coal Energy Solutions now operated in 4 European markets, with the Portugal coastal project ahead of schedule. Daniel's weeks were full and international, and required a kind of sustained attention that could easily consume everything if you let it. He was careful not to let it. He was learning that careful was not the same as easy, but was more important. Maggie's follow-up in February had been clean. The medication adjustment was working. She was coming to Charlotte again in June and had already sent Laura a message asking which botanical garden exhibit she should put on her list, because the December trip had apparently been insufficient. Vanessa and Brett's divorce had been finalized in March. The legal process had been reasonably public. The debt restructuring had attracted some local press. Laura had watched it from a distance and felt something complicated. Not satisfaction, not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition. This was what comparison built toward when it replaced actual foundation. She did not say this to anyone. She did not need to. Carol Jenkins appeared now at the edge of the porch stairs, walking her dog back from the evening route. She raised a hand when she saw them. "Still warm enough out here." "Barely," Daniel said. "I'll take barely," Carol said. She looked at them both, Laura with her unread book, Daniel with his iced tea, the ordinary, irreducible domesticity of 2 people being present on a porch. Something in her expression settled. "Good evening," she said, and walked on. Laura watched her go. She said quietly, "She's a good neighbor." "She always was," Daniel said. "I just never paid enough attention to notice." Laura turned to look at him. She thought about all the things she hadn't paid enough attention to. The drawer in the home office, the conversations she had redirected, the photograph on the nightstand of the accommodation at the Meridian Tower, the mountain park. Her laughing his hand just outside the frame. She had asked him last month who had taken that photograph. He had said a hiker who'd offered. She had asked what they had been doing at the mountain park. He had told her about the land trust Daniel had quietly supported for 4 years, a conservation project in the Blue Ridge that was trying to keep a specific valley from development. He went once a year to walk part of the trail. She had not known any of that. She had said, "Next year, can I come?" He had said, "I was wondering when you'd ask." His phone was inside on the kitchen counter. She could see the light of it through the window when notifications came in, occasional, at the rhythm of a Saturday evening, manageable. He had not checked it since they came outside. She said, "You're not going to get those." He said, "They'll be there in 20 minutes. She said, "You can answer them." He said, "I know. I'll get them in 20 minutes." He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was not remarkable and did not need to be the ordinary currency of two people who have come back to each other through something hard and know what it cost and are choosing to spend the evening on a porch anyway. The sun was going down behind the houses across the street. The particular gold of it landing in the driveway on the oak leaves on the hood of the 2015 pickup truck that was still after all this time in the same spot where it had always been. Laura looked at the truck. She had looked at that truck for 7 years as evidence of limitation. She had pointed at it in the driveway in August as punctuation for a speech about inadequacy. She had meant it as diminishment. Now she looked at it in the evening light and saw what it actually was, a man's choice. A deliberate refusal to perform wealth for people who would use it as a metric. A quiet, consistent 7-year statement about what mattered. The truck had never changed. What had changed was whether she was paying attention. "Thank you for not filing divorce," she said. He said, "Thank you for Greensboro." They had said these things before in the diner in the month since, occasionally, because some truths need to be said more than once to fully settle. Neither of them minded saying them again. The sky was going pink. The grilling 2 houses down was probably about done. A bicycle went past with a child-sized rider too young to have any idea that the man on that porch ran a company with operations on 2 continents, or that the woman beside him had once stood in that driveway and chosen the wrong direction, or that any of this had happened at all. Which was honestly how it should be. This was Hadley Court on a Saturday evening in May. People on porches, dogs being walked, a truck in a driveway catching the last light. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that needed to be. Laura opened her book. She didn't read it immediately. She sat with it open in her lap and looked at the street for another few minutes, letting the evening finish settling. Daniel finished his iced tea. He set the glass on the armrest of the porch chair. He did not pick up his phone. They stayed outside until the light was almost gone. If you've been thinking about someone you stopped paying attention, to someone who's been showing you who they are all along, and maybe you've been too busy measuring to notice, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear what this story brought up for you. And stay with us for more stories about what love actually looks like when it survives the truth.